Who the hell are those guys?
I have no idea. They look like they're up to no good.
Vandals. Wait, this is Talk Heathen?
Surprise.
Oh, man. We should totally chase them.
Heathen. I am Bianca, and with me today is this guy. We found him wandering around the building. We figured, why not give him a shot at this?
Got to put me to use when you can.
How are you doing, Matt?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good. Crazy weekend. Started off filming a super secret new show with Jenna Belk and Jen Aldridge, and that'll be coming up soon. And then I was on Neil the 604 Atheists podcast last night. Happy birthday, Neil.
Sweet. You might be doing more things than I am.
I've got to make up for lost time, man. Real quick, I just wanted to get a couple announcements out of the way. As you know, the ACA is a 501c3 nonprofit, which means we run on donations. So if you want to help keep the lights on and keep us doing what we're doing, feel free to go to patreon.com/talkheathen-to-me. Everything that you give the show goes right back into the building and the people here. And if you want to call the show, the number is 512-686-0279. That's 512-686-0279. The lines are currently full, but as soon as we end a call, that's when you call in. All right. I guess you have anything else?
No.
All right, let's get started. Also, this is my first cup of coffee in 2 months, so I am fucking wired. All right, let's go to Dustin in Colorado first. Hi, Dustin. How are you today?
Hi, V. I'm doing pretty good. Good
Awesome.
to hear from you guys.
Yeah, thanks for calling in.
Of course. Always a big fan. I didn't actually see who was co-hosting. Didn't expect to see Matt today. So
surprise.
Sorry.
Exciting. Yeah. No, you're all good.
So what are you calling about?
It was kind of difficult to see it on the call screen. It's kind of hard to explain. I know Matt's touched on this on the Atheist Experience a couple of times, but I'm wondering why make the distinction that you are not convinced that God exists? Why wouldn't you say that I don't believe God exists, or I believe God doesn't? Well, no, because they are different things. Why not just say God does not exist, just as unicorns don't exist? If evidence changes that, sure, but why not live your life saying God doesn't exist?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's a matter of taking the agnostic part of my worldview into account. I don't necessarily believe we can know, like, capital T truths necessarily. And so to say anything is 100% true would not necessarily gel with my worldview. And when you're talking with theists specifically, they usually approach, is God real or not real, as an ultimate T truth. Capital T truth, rather. So for me, saying God is not real, or I don't believe God is real, is easier than saying God is not real, just because that puts the burden not on me, but on the other person.
Yeah, it's, first of all, saying I am not convinced a God exists is true for every God proposition, whereas I am convinced that a God does not exist might only be true for specific gods. Essentially, I don't want to claim that I can falsify an unfalsifiable proposition. So it's just a matter of being sound with epistemology. The other aspect is what V just touched on. I don't want to unnecessarily adopt a burden of proof that I may not be able to meet. So in logic, if we're constructing a syllogism, it's about a single proposition or a single issue, not both sides of it. There's a reason why in a courtroom we don't determine that the defendant is innocent. We just determine whether or not we are convinced of their guilt or not convinced of their guilt. And not being convinced of someone's guilt is not the same thing as being convinced that somebody's innocent.
Right. Imagine a coin toss, right? You say heads or tails, and someone tosses the coin and holds their hand over it. Saying I believe that it's heads is different than I don't know which side it's on, right? So you can reserve judgment because there's no way to know at that point.
But it's not an agnostic middle ground between two.
Right.
What we have is somebody who's saying, that coin came up heads, and I'm going to bet my life on it and preach to everybody that coin came up heads. And we're saying we're not convinced it's heads, Doesn't mean we're convinced there's tails. We might be, and
Exactly.
for good reason. So it's just about making sure we parse things out in a way where you're not making a mistake with regard to foundations and epistemology, and that you are accurately representing what the truth is or what you believe.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that if I have like a good null hypothesis, rather than like a null hypothesis being this doesn't exist, we want to say we're not convinced that this exists. We have to we have to provide evidence that convinces the existence of or the non-existence of. The null hypothesis should be indifferent.
No.
Is that different?
So I'm fine with so. In a courtroom, the null hypothesis is that the defendant is innocent until proven guilty. And when we're talking about the existence of something, the null hypothesis needs to be that something does not exist until there's demonstration that it exists, or more accurately, that we cannot believe or argue that it does not exist or that it exists until there's a demonstration of it. So atheism is essentially the null hypothesis. And we are, in fact, living our life as if there is no God, because until the situation changes and we have evidence for God, then your question and your concern that these are kind of functionally identical is accurate. But making sure that we're kind of precise in how we phrase it is how we avoid, well, hopefully we were avoiding confusion, but I don't know that there's any way to avoid confusion at this point.
Yeah, this seems to be a point of confusion quite a lot.
That's okay. I've called it with a kind of complicated way of living your life and then phrasing how you live your life is going to be different things. I can see the problem with, like, if I say I'm an atheist and I believe God doesn't exist, I'm adopting a burden of proof then to say I've demonstrated that God doesn't exist, and that would be the problem.
Right, exactly.
Right. And if you said I'm an atheist who's going to live my life as if God doesn't exist, that's just a statement of what your null hypothesis is, what your default position is. I need to be convinced that there is a God before I can adopt, changes to my life based on that belief.
Right. And if you're talking, especially with a theist, about this issue, if you come at it by saying, I believe God doesn't exist, or just God doesn't exist, you're going to waste a whole lot of time arguing that with them instead of what you could be arguing about just based on semantics.
Especially if nobody's defined what God you're talking about.
Right.
You'd be like, your God is fictional. Okay, prove it. Well, okay, tell me what your God is. And now you look, really silly that you have reached a conclusion before anything's even been defined.
Mm-hmm.
Oops. Well, this is a good conversation to have. I think I'd spoken with V and Eric last time I had called in. I have great interest in trying to actually create a show where I could have conversations like this with people. And I'm still very young and green to this, but I am passionate about it.
Me
I'm
too.
a biologist. I've studied evolution, and I feel like that's going to come up a whole bunch if I start a show.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it may be worthwhile for people who have expertise like yours to start doing content like that, because we're going to get countless calls about biology and evolution, and neither of us are scientists. Yeah, we probably understand these topics better than theistic creationists who are calling in, because we probably understand their Bible and their religion better than they do, because most people just don't really have a good understanding of what they believe and why.
Yeah. But yeah, if you start a channel talking about the biology bit and the evolution bit, we'll just forward them over to you.
I would appreciate that greatly. I'll let you know if I tried contacting Boulder, and it looks like that organization's kind of shut down, so I'll have to probably start from scratch entirely.
Well, if you just
find an open radio show.
I realize that moving away from Colorado would probably get you to someplace where weed isn't legal, but if you were to come to Austin, maybe Mark would put you to work.
I just started a job as a biologist. I think I'm going to be here for a little while, but I appreciate the offer.
Well, congratulations.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you guys for taking my call. Have a great rest of your Sunday.
You too.
You too.
Okay.
I need you to do something odd. The brown bag that I put on that side.
Yeah.
Can you hand it to me? Because it's got my
right.
glasses and I can't read the board. But yeah, that comes up all the time, And I've done a couple of videos where I talk about definitions of atheist and agnostic, and there's fights within the community. There's fights outside the community. And what I finally came down to in the video that I put out is, I don't care what label you put on it. And if the label gets in the way of actually discussing what your actual position is, throw the label out and instead say, here's what my position is, which is why I've changed from, I don't tend to say lack of belief anymore. There were people that concerned that sounded like a deficiency. and I can see where they're coming from, although I'm not convinced.
Right.
I also switched from saying I don't believe to I am not convinced. And I think I am, and several people suggested this, and thank you to those who did over the years, I am convinced that I am not convinced is a much more precise and clear phrasing of what the position is.
Right, that makes sense. I kind of disagree on the labeling bit. I mean, yes, by all means, in those interpersonal conversations and for you personally, if it doesn't feel like atheist is the right label for you, then that's fine. No one's forcing you to use it. But also the fact that there are so many non-religious people in the U.S. currently growing. Pew just released a new report. I think it's,
Yes.
26% now?
Yes.
And only about 7 or 8% of those people say they're atheist.
Oh, it's lower, 3.
3%. Okay.
But it has to do with the way the questions are phrased. But we can
Right,
do that.
exactly. But if you want to increase representation of atheists within the concept of census and polls and stuff like that, then the label is useful.
I would love that. I would certainly, I am in agreement with some people who I disagree with on other things about atheist normalcy and getting people used to the label. But my primary concern is not what people call themselves, but like that whole 26% that are not
Right.
religious, that is progress and that is a goal. And I think when that number, that 26%, when that number gets closer to 50, I think you'll see a massive spike in the people who are willing to use the atheist label.
Right.
Whereas some of them are just like, well, I'm spiritual but not religious, or I'm not religious. There's a ton of people who love agnostic despite
It not
necessarily fitting. It may be true. Like, depending on your definition of knowledge, I might be an agnostic atheist. Matter of fact, I am for some things.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Let's go to Chris in North America.
That's specific.
Heard about that place. Hey, Chris, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing good. Excited you called in. What can we help you with?
I'm just going to give some quick background for it first, just so it makes full sense in context. But I do need to include this story just to give you some background, and I understand that it might be a sensitive topic for some people. It doesn't really bother me anymore, but it might bother other people. So when I was about 7 years old, 3 people tried to kill me in a church after-school program. This wasn't why I questioned my faith, though I am currently agnostic, but it did lead to me getting flashbacks of what happened when I'm in a church building. My mom knows that I get these. She doesn't know I'm agnostic, but I think she suspects it. But she still insists that I go to church with her on holidays and during concerts when she's singing. I've been doing that for years, but I've been recently making excuses not to go. And I don't really think I can go back. But if I don't go, like for Vigilia, for Christmas Eve, my whole family is going to know, and it's going to stand out.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm so sorry that is something you have to deal with. That's horrific.
I don't want to dig on anything that's going to be, too hurtful, but
The event itself does not bother me anymore.
well,
You're stronger than I
yeah.
can be.
So what do you mean when you say some people, when you were 7, tried to kill you in a church?
It was a church after-school program, and 3 boys tried to hold me down and smother me, and somebody walked in before they could kill me.
Oh my God. Wow. Yay, church after school programs.
Yeah, and I mean, it probably should have affected how I treated religion, just because the priest was originally going to side with my mom and make the boys not able to go there anymore, but then he changed his mind and said, well, you just have to take her elsewhere if you don't want her to be around them.
Of course.
And
of course. Shit.
there were other issues too, like where it's like, if you're a good Christian, you're just going to forgive them, and et cetera, et cetera. But I mean,
what happened to an eye for an eye? Maybe we should hold them down and attempt to smother them for a little while.
no, I mean, oh man, one of those kids was just absolutely crazy. I mean, he confessed to me a week before.
Wow.
I mean, yeah.
Wow. Well, I understand the hesitation to go back and the concept of having flashbacks, because I do have those, not for anything as serious, but I get that for sure. So I guess your question is, how do you navigate getting out of
Not going? Yeah.
Okay. So you said that they know about the flashbacks. They know that these happen.
My mom does, and I recently told my stepdad about it, but none of the rest of my family knows. And it's kind of, my stepdad's side is Catholic, my mom's Presbyterian, and we've been celebrating Vigilia, which is, his side is Polish. We've been celebrating Vigilia, going to church, coming back and finishing Vigilia. So everybody's going to know if I'm the only one who doesn't go.
Right. I mean, I've been in that same position too. Before I came out as an atheist, it was a lot of that conversation. Oh, we're going to church. You want to come? Like, no, I think I'm busy, or I'm going to go to another church. That's something I played around with for a while before I was fully ready to come out to them, was I would just pretend I was going to a different church. So it's possible, if you're not ready to come out to everybody, to just say, oh, hey, I found another church, I'm going to go there instead, but you guys have fun.
I don't know if that excuse would work, since we've been going to this one for so long, and like, I don't know. I think she would not believe it.
That's fair.
And I think it's kind of a yes or no kind of an option right now. And
do you feel safe saying no? Like, are you going to lose access to resources that you need to survive if you say no?
I don't know how it's going to go. I don't think I'll lose access to resources. I do think it would throw a wrench in the relationship, especially if they started asking why.
Yeah.
And her suspicions were confirmed. I mean, we almost had that conversation once, and it was a lot of, like, that's when she started insisting that I start going again.
Yeah.
And it just didn't go well. I mean, it was civil, but I mean, it was almost like I was a totally different person.
Right.
To her if I wasn't Christian.
Yeah. Yeah, that is definitely the hump you have to get over. I think for me, my decision would come down to what's going to cause you the most emotional relief. Which one is going to, because it seems like you're kind of at an either or situation here. You said like a yes or no. So which one of those is going to be best for you emotionally and mentally? Would it be easier for you to go through this holiday season and be forced to confront certain flashbacks and certain emotions and be in a position where you feel like you have to go? Or is it going to be easier for you to kind of cut ties with that part of your life and let your family know where you stand? Unfortunately, I can't make that decision for you. That's a very personal one. But I think put yourself first. Make sure that you're doing what you think is best for you.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with, certainly I don't recall anybody ever trying to kill me in church, and I don't have flashbacks. So setting that part aside, I had to make a decision about whether or not I was more comfortable with people liking me for me and knowing who I was, or if I would pretend. But even after I was an out atheist, and like after Beth and I got married, of course, everybody in her family knew I was an atheist because I was already hosting the TV show then. But it didn't keep me from going to church for special events and things. And that really made some things clear to people who had questions about me. Now, I realize I'm talking about something different from my own parents. My own parents' view on it is, God gives you free will to make your choice, and you made your choice, and we're going to leave it in God's hands. In the case of my in-laws, it let them know that despite the fact that we disagree, I'm willing to participate in things to maintain the cohesive family unit. And I'm not there to, I don't catch on fire when I walk into church. I don't stand up in the middle of the sermon and start pissing on things. It let them know that, this is just a guy, he just doesn't believe what I believe. And for me, there was a couple of different things. One of them is I wanted to not only be autonomous, but to be respected and treated as an adult. And the notion that someone would withhold love or respect or anything else merely because we didn't agree on something that, by the way, they can't argue successfully for, was really troubling to me. And I finally just made up my mind, and I did it again this March with the birthday card that I read. Mm-hmm. When I read that, I read it with the knowledge that if this ends with my relationship with my parents, I have to be okay with that. And I was, because it was far more important to let people know that this stuff, that I have to deal with this stuff, that I'm not some, paragon of atheism without the hassles of religion. And that was more valuable to me. And calling people out for their crap was more valuable to me, because I hadn't done anything to them or about them. I'm not trying to change their mind. I'm not, suggesting that they need to change. I mean, how silly would it be for me to say, you know what, Mom, Dad, we can't have any more family dinners until you agree with me and denounce your religion. And maybe in the course of having those discussions, framing things that way might help them realize this isn't about you and me. This isn't me saying, Mom, you're wrong. This is not me saying, Mom, I don't like you. It's, I am not convinced of what you're convinced of. And so convince me, and if you can't, that's not my fault. And if anything, it's God's fault. And why is it that you won't give me the same respect as an autonomous human being that I would give you?
Yeah, I know that wouldn't go over well with her, but I totally understand what you mean.
It didn't go over particularly well with some of my relatives either, but it went over well with me, and I am personally far happier having done that and knowing that I took honest steps and was respectful, and that I could argue both sides of this better than they could, and instead of using that to beat people up, I just use it to expose the fact that one of us has definitely taken this seriously when it comes to looking into the evidence, and the other one has taken it seriously in the sense of accepting what they've been told. Mm-hmm. And there's a difference between those, and one of them is far more problematic than the other.
Yeah, I think ultimately, if you just either way you decide, feel free to call back and let us know kind of what happened and what you dealt with. We'll be here to listen and to support you. And also, have you heard of Recovering from Religion?
I was actually watching through the backlog. Somebody only told me today in the Discord chat about Talk Heathen, because I was originally thinking of calling into the Atheist Experience because that's the only show I know about. And I've been starting to watch the backlog, and I just saw an episode where they talked about that, so I know where the number is.
Yeah.
Awesome, wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, that would be my next step, is to kind of call them and maybe get some support from them as well.
And the other thing is to look for a secular community in your area. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I mean, there are secular communities in North America, but but finding.
I actually told them Northern America. So.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Well, there are some there. If you're in New England, though, there may be fewer of those, because in the entire time that I've been part of the secular movement, I have never spoken anywhere in New England.
Interesting.
Well, all right, New York, New Jersey, but I mean like Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, any place where it's close to Canada. I've been to Canada countless times. Did a tour there last year. Mm-hmm. And yet, curiously, New England, they don't seem to give a shit about religion quite often.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for calling, Chris, and we wish you the best, really.
Okay, thank you both so much.
Yeah, keep at it.
Thanks.
Bye. That's hard. It's the common story, though. It's kind of like the trial by fire that a lot of deconverts have to go through, is having to have these really hard conversations.
It might be worth it, and we'll have people from Recovering from Religion back on. We've had Daryl and Gail, but also I talked about getting some of the volunteer counselors to call in, because I don't have any data on this, but I would suspect people talk about what keeps people in religion. And quite often we talk about, the various fears that religion exploits, the fear of what happens after death or the fear of being alone. But the fear of being alone gets amplified when we start talking about family relationships.
Right.
And I would argue that the fear of being ostracized from your relatives might be the strongest factor in determining whether or not somebody continues to participate in religious stuff, even when they don't believe anymore. It's for fear of, am I going to, is Christmas going to be incredibly awkward?
Right.
Our family dinner is going to be awkward. Am I going to get kicked out? Because we know of people, we've helped teenagers who have been kicked out of their homes by their parents just because they no longer share the religion that their parents do.
Right. Yeah, it's rough. I've been very lucky myself, but yeah, I have friends who this is the story that they tell, and it's really hard. Okay, I think we're going to take a theist caller. Do you want to take Jonathan in Arizona?
Sure.
Hey, Jonathan, how are you doing today?
Good. Hi, V. Hi, Matt.
Hello.
Hi, Jonathan.
What you calling in about?
Yeah, so, actually, I called and talked to V and Eric a couple weeks ago under the same pretenses where V and I were having an email exchange. And coincidentally...
Hello, Jonathan.
Yeah,
hello again.
Hi. Yeah. Coincidentally, I had sent Matt an email the other night, and he responded yesterday. And I was like, hey, what a great opportunity to not have to do the email thing and just talk.
Well, what can we help you with? Also,
yeah,
do you want to kind of summarize what the email was about first so that we've got everyone on the same page?
Some context. Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I had quoted Matt saying that you can't use the Bible to prove the Bible, and because you need to have independent attestation for it. So I sent the email specifically asking about the New Testament, that it's a compilation of independent attestations that just happens to be like in one book, and how it makes sense to say you need independent attestation of now what is a collective of independent attestations. So I was just like trying to understand the reasoning behind that.
Yeah, I remember this, and I also remember being incredibly pleased with my response and thinking that this would require no further discussion.
What was your response?
Yeah.
So the Bible the New Testament is a collection of different accounts. The problem is that, first of all, we don't know who the authors are for a lot of it. We don't have any way to investigate it. It was put together by biased sources. And instead of being a collection of independent affirmations of something, it is far closer to a collection of ghost stories told by different people. And so you can put together, the plural of anecdote is not data. And so you can put together as many claims about this particular ghost story as you'd like, and yet that isn't enough on its own to confirm anything. You would need independent verification of the facts, not just more people telling a story, especially if you have no way to investigate it.
And especially if it's been proven that they're building off of each other.
Right.
Well, I mean, you would kind of expect that from independent sources that are talking about the same story, wouldn't you? I mean, the example I gave as comparison was, it sounds like you could say the exact same thing in school reading a history book.
No.
A history book is a compilation of...
No.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Matt.
So do you believe that people are being abducted by aliens?
I really don't.
I don't either. And yet we have countless stories from people, and these stories are incredibly similar, including the descriptions of what the ships look like, including the descriptions of what the aliens look like. So there's a collection of independent attestations, and yet it is insufficient because the nature of the claim is such that we would require more. 100 people tell me that there's a new pet at the local pet store that's unlike anything I've ever seen. I'm going to go down and look for it. If they tell me they all got new dogs, I'm just going to take them at their word. But people tell me that they were abducted by aliens, or that they've seen ghosts, or that there's a man who turned water into wine, walked on water as if it were dry land, raised the dead, healed the sick, etc. Those things require investigation and evidence beyond just the claim. And so if you aren't willing to believe that people are being abducted by aliens, when you can actually go meet and talk to those people who made those claims, so you can get their firsthand accounts, how could you possibly believe a document thousands of years old that is a copy of a translation of a copy of an oral tradition by somebody you don't know and is so far removed from you temporally that you can't even investigate it?
Right, and then I'm not actually like trying to make an argument for the truth of the claims of the New Testament. I'm just looking for like consistency on comparing what you're saying to something that's, another historical event that has the exact same source material, but you're not saying it needs to be independently attested.
Well,
that's
usually when we talk about historical documents, we are talking about we need verification from non-biased sources. And so when somebody reports on a war that happened, if all of your information is coming from one side of that war, now all of a sudden all of their views are suspect. But if people on both sides of a war are reporting the same facts, where those facts overlap, now you have a good reason to think you are closer to the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not like the New Testament is a collection of biased and unbiased sources. And when you go outside of the New Testament, when you go to somebody like Josephus, who is an actual historian, albeit very early and perhaps not with the best methods, you don't have those independent, unbiased historians confirming the facts of the Bible. Even in the testimonium within Josephus's work, which is probably an interpolation because it probably didn't exist in the originals. But even if it were there, all it really attests to is that there are people who believe this happened. It's not testifying that this thing actually happened. And that would be me like writing a news story about flat earthers. And then in 2,000 years, there'll be people who go, wow, there were people who believed the earth was flat as late as 2019. And that's completely different from the earth is flat.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and some of that makes sense. Some of it, just to be honest, it doesn't seem to make sense because we're referring to Josephus saying, all he was saying is people at the time believed it. He does make specific claims, at least, the crucifixion of Jesus under Pilate and Jesus having a brother named James. I mean, those are specific. Those aren't just, hey, a bunch of people at the time believed it. Those are specific attestations of, certain claims of the New Testament.
No. These are not claims of fact. These are claims about what people believe. Josephus wasn't even alive when these things occurred.
Right. You can be extremely specific and still be wrong.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I guess I do have to backtrack because Josephus was like beginning of the 1st century, if I'm not mistaken, beginning of the 2nd century, something like that.
Something around 60, 75, I think, is when he was born. I might be wrong in the dates, but at best, he was talking to second or third hand sources, and he's reporting on what they believe to be true. He cannot report these things actually happened.
Right. And I guess in all fairness, in 100 years, nobody will be able to actually say that the Holocaust actually happened.
Except that we have documents from Holocaust survivors.
And we can go to concentration camps.
And people on both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we can, again, in 100 years, you could say, well, I don't know that those were actually written by the people who survived the Holocaust. I mean, you could be skeptical to the point where it's,
You could, but we are at a point where the documentation process is much stronger now than it is for something 2,000 years ago.
Right.
And so it becomes increasingly irrational to suggest that multiple reports from people on both sides of an issue can't get us to something close to a good understanding of what likely happened. Now, I don't think you can be absolutely certain about anything, let alone, historical claims. But you can be. What you can say is, in the 20th century, we have countless reports of a war. We have video footage, photographs, and we have accounts from people who claimed to be there, who survived that, who lost family members there. And so, yes, in 2,000 years, Holocaust denialism might be slightly more plausible than it is now, but what you're kind of overlooking is that as our ability to record and save information and make sure that it doesn't change over time, when you have digital recordings of things, and you can never prove absolutely that something hasn't been manipulated or that the masterminds at Google are secretly going in and changing all of this. But that is a claim that is itself extraordinary, and you would need to demonstrate the likelihood of that.
Right.
This is very different from, hey, we have this book, and it's a collection of writings, most of those writings, we have no idea who the author is. We know currently from the information, we have no originals. No original manuscripts at all, let alone who wrote them. And all of these were collected by believers, and they essentially held councils to vote on what was getting in and what wasn't. We don't tend to vote on what gets put into the history books.
Well, Texas does.
All right, that's the history textbooks that we give to kids. But it's like the Library of Congress is, if you write a book and you get an ISBN, it's going in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
I mean, what you're saying makes sense. Like, I understand everything you're saying. It's just there's variances in certain things that I either don't necessarily agree with or I think are being misrepresented. And not purposely, I don't think.
Like what?
Saying, well, like the issue of the New Testament documents not having independent attestation of, like, say, those who didn't have a bias or didn't affirm it to be true, stuff like that. When, from what I've read, there's plenty of that, actually.
Wait,
Like,
where?
Well, I think the Jewish Talmud, first of all. I mean, they write about Jesus and not in a very flattering, light way. I mean, but they write about him and that he was a blasphemer. And I mean, that to me is probably the best attestation you could get, is someone who hates you and is still saying, at the very least, there are claims written about him that happen to be in the New Testament that are true.
That would be
that's just one of the things.
That would be a good point if you were arguing against a claim of mythicism. But it's not a good point if you are arguing for divinity, because the Talmud...
No, I'm not arguing... Yeah, I'm sorry, man. I'm not arguing for theism at all.
I just lost my headset.
Oh.
I'm sorry. Let me know when you're back.
Can you
Yeah,
hear?
I can hear just fine. Okay, so I know, because we've had this conversation before
I'm
as
back.
well, that you're not trying to argue for divinity yet. You're trying to establish a baseline of Jesus existed, and then we can go from there. Is that right?
No, that was definitely in the context of the conversation that you, Eric, and I had. This was just mainly on consistency of you need independent attestation for a book that is compiled of independent attestation. That's the part where I was getting hazy.
I guess my question for you then is that if you're not trying to argue for divinity and you're not arguing on behalf of theism, then why would you care? Why should we care?
Why would I care about what?
Whether or not we can use the Bible to prove the Bible.
Well, like, basically, it seems like there's if what I'm saying is right, and that's a big if, I'm sure. If you're saying you need independent attestation, but the compilation itself is the independent attestation, then there's got to be something else that you're actually meaning, and you're looking for something else to verify the validity of the independent attestation.
But I described that. What we're looking for is unbiased sources, and preferably sources that are in opposition. And so when you go to, like, the Talmud, and you look at the passages that some people would view as talking about Jesus, there's a lot of problems with them, because you've got Yeshua ben Pintera and a view that he was killed in, almost the 2nd century CE. That clearly can't be talking about the same Jesus. So, but even if it was, even if the Talmud included, around this year, give or take a couple, there was a heretic who was killed at the hand of Pontius Pilate, et cetera. None of that gets to... Can you still hear me if I talk? Because my headset went out. There it is. None of that gets to whether or not these events occurred, the miraculous events, the things that might lead to divinity, and there were plenty of potential messiahs and plenty of people whose name was Yeshua, and to just argue that because there was a mention that this then affirms not only the existence of the particular one that you're talking about, that's a problem. You may be right, you may not. But none of that gets us any closer to whether or not this was not just an itinerant rabbi who was preaching heretical things, but whether or not this was the Son of God who died for our sins. And plus, I don't even think we need to go into potential evidence for that, because the notion is absurd in the first place.
So if there were more, like, say, archaeology discovers, in 100 years, that there's a bunch of more, unbiased, opposition attestations for, Jesus, Yeshua, whatever. Can we just say the same thing? Because you're saying like we need it to be unbiased. We need it from the opposition. That would give it more credibility. But even if we had that, couldn't you say the exact same thing? Well, we don't know that they're talking about that Yeshua.
Well, yeah, we would need them to talk about that Yeshua.
We need to be pretty specific. Here's the big question you need to ask, Jonathan.
Go ahead.
If there is a God, and the story about Jesus is true, where God essentially takes human form and comes down and sacrifices himself to serve as a loophole for rules that he created. And it is important for us now 2,000 years later to have an evidence-based, warranted belief in this in order to accept it. Then how could we ever be having discussions and debates with confusion about which Jesus we're talking about, or are we talking about Jesus, and we can't verify miracles? If there is a God, that God has utterly failed at understanding good standards of evidence, because there should be no debate. This has got to be, if this is all true, this has got to be the single most important thing in the entire history of the world. And it is not sufficiently attested to and backed up with evidence, and that has to be God's fault. What kind of idiot does this?
Yeah, and I see what you're saying, but and again, you could be skeptical to the point of being like irrational, right? So, any level of evidence that should... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Skepticism is rational. Skepticism is not, I don't believe. Skepticism is a process by which we want our internal model of reality to match reality. And so we are not going to become convinced of things until the evidence warrants it. Skepticism is not cynicism. It's not debunking. It is not saying, no. It is impossible. It is impossible. It is impossible to be too skeptical.
Okay. Why do you say that?
Because skepticism is about testing to be as correct as possible. Can you be too correct?
No, I guess you can't be too correct.
There you go.
You can't have like too much evidence. But it's like, I could say I don't believe that my mother and my father are actually my mother and father, even though to me, that's too skeptical. Like, I have no reason not to believe it.
That's not too skeptical.
DNA test.
You can deny whatever you want. You can be a Holocaust denier, but you can't say that you're doing it because you're skeptical.
Right, exactly.
You don't understand skepticism if you think that you can be too skeptical. And that's why I said, can you be too correct? Because that's what skepticism is. It is, let's use the best methods to avoid being wrong. Now, can you be wrong and still be skeptical? Absolutely. Because for some things, there may not ever be enough evidence to warrant it. I have no idea what happened before the Big Bang, or whether that sentence even makes sense.
Right, yeah.
But that's my skepticism is I'm going to believe it when the evidence warrants it, and not a moment before. Because if I believe it before the evidence warrants it, now I'm being unskeptical, I am being gullible, I am being irrational. And if I deny that something exists when there is sufficient evidence for it, that's also not skepticism.
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm. So, like, being like a hard solipsist is not like skeptical, like of other people actually existing?
No, being a hard solipsist is asserting a position that you can't demonstrate, and that would not be consistent with skepticism. Being a soft solipsist is consistent with skepticism, because that's an acknowledgement that I cannot demonstrate that I'm not the only mind in the world.
Okay. I didn't know the distinction between those two.
Yeah.
Hard solipsism is nobody exists but me.
Which then is a claim that you cannot prove or disprove, and therefore it's illogical to hold it.
Yeah, essentially it's about falsifiability. I can't falsify the proposition there is no God. I can't falsify the proposition. Well, that's falsifiable by demonstrating that a God exists.
Right.
But I cannot demonstrate that it's not the case that it is the case that I am in fact the only mind. There's no way to show that that's false.
Mm-hmm. So, like something that's like extremely well attested scientifically, or with the best methods that we have on determining what's more probable to be true. Like, pick something like how stars form, or something that's easy that we understand through physics and astronomy and stuff. For someone to actually be aware of all of this evidence and information and say, I'm still not convinced. That to you is not being too skeptical when all of the evidence suggests that's true?
No, they're not being too skeptical. They're being irrational.
The skepticism doesn't have anything to do with it. It just goes straight to irrationality.
Skepticism would say, when there's sufficient evidence, I will accept it. And you are describing a scenario where there is sufficient evidence, but someone won't accept it. That's not skepticism, that's cynicism.
Isn't that subjective, though, to the individual?
It's going to be up to you to determine what is going to convince you or not. But you can't claim that your standards of being convinced are objectively correct. That's something you'd need to demonstrate. For example, you could say, well, you could be the doubting Thomas thing. I'm not going to believe Jesus until he's standing in front of me and I see the nail holes in my hand, which, by the way, is not sufficient evidence to warrant belief in that.
Right.
But you could do something like that. Or you could say, I don't believe you have $100 in your wallet, and I open my wallet and show it to you, and you could say, I don't believe it still. Well, now you're not engaged in skepticism. You're engaged in denialism or cynicism. And you can sit there all day and be convinced that you're rational, but you're clearly not. This would be like saying, I don't believe this pen works, and then I write your name and say, read that to me, and you read it, and then you say, I still don't believe that pen works. That is what you're trying to describe as too skeptical, but that's not skepticism. Because skepticism...
But it sounds like you're describing proof rather than evidence, because evidence can be wrong. But proof is conclusive.
No. So first of all, proof is a mathematical term. What we're talking about in science is demonstrating something with sufficient evidence, but also every position we hold should be tentative, and our confidence in that position should be proportional to the evidence. Mathematics has proof. Proof in the colloquial sense is just give me a demonstration, and you're saying, oh, well, that's sufficient.
Right. I think the issue here is that we're working off of different terms, and Matt, you're kind of going off of the more technical terms of what skepticism is, what a proof is. And Jonathan, it sounds like you're using them how like normal everyday people would use the term proof or skepticism, but they're not the same thing. They're different concepts. Just like a theory in science is different than when I say I have a theory that Matt's gonna oversleep today. You know?
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think that this is, again...
well, that raised an interest. How would you define theory, Jonathan?
So I have, when I think of the word theory, I think there's like three theories. There's unproven theories, disproven theories, and proven theories. So I kind of, when it comes to a theory is something like the theory of gravity, where the apple hits you in the head, and all of a sudden...
The thing is, once it becomes disproved, it's no longer a theory.
A theory in science is the highest thing that an idea, a hypothesis, can achieve.
Yeah, best describes like the event or whatever it is that's being investigated as the best model for it.
Yeah, a theory or model is essentially... There's an observation, and now granted, there isn't a scientific method. There are a bunch of scientific methods. But if you begin with an observation, you create a hypothesis, then you investigate and try to come up with evidence that affirms that hypothesis, and then you attempt to disprove that hypothesis. And then there's the whole thing surrounding peer review and independent investigation, because the truth has nothing to fear from inquiry. And so if it's true that Jesus is the Son of God, then we would expect, A, there would be evidence for it, unless there's some reason for God to hide that evidence, in which case he can't expect people to accept it if he's hiding the evidence. God is playing world hide-and-seek champion every year. But if God is not providing enough evidence, then the fault now rests with God. If there's just not enough evidence, then all you can say is, I am not convinced, and no reasonable person could be convinced.
And you're talking in general on a general claim, not like theism altogether. I mean, not just theism, right?
Any claim.
Yeah.
The claim doesn't matter. For different claims, there's different evidential standards. Like if somebody tells me, hey, I mentioned this earlier and many times in the past, hey, I just got a new puppy. Cool. I'm going to take you at your word because I know that puppies exist and people have them as pets, and I know things about you and everything else. And I'm saying that knowing that I could in fact be wrong. But the consequences of me being wrong doesn't shake my worldview from an epistemological standpoint. It just means you are no longer trustworthy. Now, if you say, I just was abducted by aliens last night, now all of a sudden the nature of the claim has changed, and this type of evidence that we would expect for that should change as well. And so when you say Jesus is divine and performed miracles and rose from the dead and wants you to stop having gay sex and do all the things that he wants in order for you to live in paradise forever, that's a collection of claims that's incredibly extraordinary and would need more evidence than stories of translations of stories by anonymous authors thousands of years ago.
Right. If Yeshua, this rabbi, was just one more of there were 36, something like that, different sects of Judaism that had broken off into cults of different apocalyptic natures around that same time period. If it was just one of those various cults, and you said, hey, this existed at this point in time, I'd be like, okay, sure, fine, I'll go with that, because it doesn't impact me or my worldview. But once you make the claim that it's supposed to impact me and my worldview, then I need more evidence than I would for other claims. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense. I think that way in my daily life as well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I've been watching the atheist experience for 10 years, at least 10 years. My best friend is an atheist. I read books from atheist authors. I read books from Christian authors, apologists, stuff like that. Why? It is going to be maybe difficult for you to even attempt to answer, but how come I feel like I am being rational and coming to the conclusion that I believe the claims that are written about Jesus in the New Testament? I feel like I'm a rational person. I feel like I'm a critical thinker. I understand logic and reason. Why am I coming to an opposite conclusion?
Right. We demonstrated this earlier. You already said that you don't believe people are being abducted by aliens.
Right.
That means that you have one standard of evidence for the alien claim and a lesser standard of evidence for the Jesus claim. And the question you have to ask yourself is, why are you setting the bar so low for the Jesus claim and much higher for the alien abduction claim? It comes down to somewhere there's a hidden bias. Either it's fear of the consequences of being wrong. The consequences of being wrong about God are greater than the consequences of being wrong about alien abductions. Or maybe you have some hidden desires related to family members, as we discussed before, or an afterlife, or some preference for something that you're not willing to acknowledge yourself. But I would think that both of us would agree you have a lower standard of evidence for the Jesus claim than you do for the alien abduction claim.
I don't know. I don't know if I do or not. And even if I do, I don't know how I'd actually be able to determine that.
It's really easy. There are many claims about people being abducted, and you can go and talk to them firsthand and hear their account. And in many cases, you can go out and investigate things. They are closer to you temporally, in temporal proximity, in that maybe somebody thinks they got abducted by aliens in the last couple of years. You can talk to them, you can investigate, and you can look into this evidence, and yet I would bet that you don't, and you don't believe them. And yet, when it comes to the Jesus thing, you have sources that you cannot identify, cannot name, cannot talk to. You have no way to investigate these things. You are much farther removed from them in time, and the claim is vastly more extraordinary because the alien claim doesn't violate necessarily the physical laws in the universe. There's nothing supernatural about the notion that life might have come from somewhere else to here, that there might be advanced technology. So you are accepting a much more extraordinary claim based on worse evidence.
So to kind of be specific, I have specific reasons why I don't think that alien life is probable. I don't know. I'm not here saying I know God exists. I wouldn't do that because it's monumentally arrogant, I think. I have to believe it because the arguments that I have, spent 10 years reading about and learning about, and the vast amount that I've learned from the show, has just led me to the conclusion that, in my mind, the way that I use my epistemology or whatever, it has led me to the belief that this is more probably true.
Take the last 3 sentences you said, and replace any reference to God or religion with aliens or alien abductions. And why is it?
Well, that's not the same. It's not the same thing because I'm aware of evidence that makes alien life unlikely.
Okay, so what is that evidence? Because we know, no. Science shows that alien life is not only incredibly likely, but probable. Whether or not they come here, whether or not they have technology where they could come here and abduct people is a separate issue. But life outside of Earth is wholly unremarkable. Do you know how big the universe is? It's far more improbable that life only exists on this one little frickin' rock.
Okay, Jonathan.
I am.
Jonathan. Yep. Okay, so we are going to have to move on, I think, to some other callers. But I have some homework for you if you would like to call back. Make a list. Awesome, me too. Make a list of the reasons you don't accept alien abduction. And then make a list of, and then compare claims about Jesus' existence to that list.
And I want to finish the one, when you're done, I want to finish the one thought that kind of got sidetracked. Because when I said take the last 3 sentences and anywhere that references God or religion substitute alien abduction, and you interrupted right away, and it's fine, I interrupt too, it's not a big deal. What I was going to say is, if you literally go back and type out what you said and change it so that it is 3 sentences about alien abductions, ask yourself, how is it, if someone who believes there were alien abductions said those 3 sentences to you, how would you reply? That's where I was going.
Mm-hmm. So do some thinking on that. Maybe write out a little bit of a list and call back next week and we'll continue the conversation.
Okay, I will definitely give it a shot. And I don't want to promise that I can get back to you next week, but I will definitely call back again when I have a chance.
Awesome.
And I had a great time talking with you guys. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for calling in. I think another thing to bring up is just that argumentum ad populum is the fallacy of assuming things are true because a large portion of the population agrees with you. I think that subconsciously that is an extremely important thing that people grab onto. If we lived in a society that was built around the acceptance of aliens, it would be a lot more likely that you also accepted that aliens existed.
That is a brilliant point.
Right? So, if you are living in this society, whether or not you think you have individual personal biases, you are biased just by default because of the way our society is set up and because of the number of people who are theists in the society.
Yeah, skepticism is about doing whatever you can to remove as much of your personal bias as possible. You're never going to be a perfect thinker, a perfect skeptic. You're not going to get rid of all your biases, but doing everything you can to figure out what those are. And if you have a different standard of evidence, a lower standard of evidence for something that is obviously more extraordinary, you got to ask why.
Exactly.
And maybe what V was pointing out about the popularity of this, that might be the biggest thing.
Yeah, ask yourself, am I believing this because other people also believe this thing? That kind of was a big part of my deconversion. But let's go to, I think it's last in India.
Hello.
Hello.
And the last shall be first.
Weren't quite first, but you're up there. What's going on? What can we help you with?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
Okay,
cool.
perfect.
So I have been part of the Discord for a while now, and I really enjoy the conversations I had here. So I thought, why not try calling?
Sure.
And one of the things that I've noticed is that most of the discussion, right, that happens online, and even in the the live sessions, right, they typically tend to focus on Abrahamic religions. Okay. So now, that was just a comment I wanted to make. But the biggest thing I wanted to talk about is what are the what exactly is the epistemological take on the reliability of testimony, or how would you, talk about the reliability of testimony in the context of knowing something? So, to assist the discussion, where I'm coming from is that I'm a theist, okay? So, and I believe strongly in being rigorous. And one of the things I've noticed is that we tend to restrict ourselves only to the epistemes of inference and perception, right?
I'm sorry, could you say that again? I didn't catch it.
I said typically, right, a rational person, or rather rationality itself is defined as sticking to the epistemes of inference and perception, right?
Inference and perception. Okay.
Would you agree with that?
Agree?
So I agree that that's what we do. I don't agree that's what we should do. So we live our lives primarily. We live our lives primarily by inference, and it's a pretty good thing because today's pretty much like yesterday.
Yeah.
And but that's about spotting a pattern and making an inference to what's likely to happen. I think abduction is something that we do as well. Arguing towards what is the best explanation is just that our arrogance gets in the way. On your question about testimony. And the reliability of testimony.
Coming back, I have this thought experiment regarding the necessity of testimony even for scientific progress, right? And I would be interested to share it. So can I share that thought? And my question is basically to ask, if testimony is to be accepted as so this thought experiment basically tries to establish that testimony is an independent source of knowledge, right? And the question of knowledge, knowing something through testimony does not, then boils down to the reliability of testimony, right?
No. So testimony gives you access to knowledge about what someone believes, but that's separate from the truth. So if somebody comes to me and says they were abducted by aliens, I'm willing to accept that they are. I'm willing to accept that they are honestly trying to give me their understanding of what happened, but I'm not willing to accept that their understanding is correct. So if somebody tells me, last night I was visited by a ghost, I'm willing to accept that they had an experience that they are describing as I was visited by a ghost.
Right.
But their testimony is not sufficient to warrant the belief this person was in fact visited by a ghost.
So so let me explain the thought experiment, right?
Okay.
And because in the flow of that, I will be able to formulate my question better as well.
Okay.
So my thought experiment goes like this. So have you heard of this thing called the cosmic microwave background radiation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So that is the primary evidence for the occurrence of the Big Bang, right? And what scientists have said is that in 500 million years from now, the cosmic microwave background radiation levels will drop below the resolution of any possible instrument that we could probably design, knowing the current laws of physics. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who live at that time will not have the same evidentiary warrant for the Big Bang model as we do.
They will not be able to practice inference and perception-based methods alone to know that the Big Bang happened.
Right.
And they would have to rely on written records or knowledge passed down through the ages to know that the Big Bang happened.
Yep.
Right. So in this case, scientific progress essentially depends on testimony rather than inference and perception in this scenario.
It depends on testimony only in the sense that here we have a number of people who are recording this was the observation at the time. There's actual data as well. The fact that someone at a future time is not able to confirm that data is a separate problem.
So you're saying that in that case, testimony is not useful?
No, I think it's useful. I just think that it wouldn't be conclusive. At some point in the future, if thinking beings continue to survive, they will not have evidentiary warrant to have the same understanding about universal origins that we have now. We are lucky in that sense.
So what I'm trying to say, so in that sense, it seems like a more resigned answer to me, right? The reason I say that is because when we say that, we cannot depend on testimony as a valid source of knowledge, in this case, we're essentially restricting ourselves from making scientific progress even.
No. Well, we are, but we're not restricting ourselves. The facts of the universe are restricting us because the goal is to have confidence that you are correct and not incorrect. let's say that, like, let's assume right now it is true. I am having a conversation with you, and you are calling from India. We'll just assume all those things to be correct. And let's say this recording is viewed by aliens on another planet in 1 billion years.
Hey, guys.
Hi. What they would have evidentiary warrant for is independent from what is in fact true. And the fact that they wouldn't have enough warrant to believe certain things is not a problem with our warrant, and it's not a problem with what is true. It is simply a fact about their point in time and what they do and don't have access to.
Okay, so in that sense, right? Okay, so if you put yourself in the shoes of that person, what you end up having is that, I am restricted from knowing certain facts of the universe.
Yep.
Because my methods of my methods of perception and inference are inadequate. And if I wish to know more about the universe, I have to rely solely on testimony, right?
No. That's where you've gone off the rails.
Okay. Yeah.
Once you get to the point where I don't have access to sufficient evidence to have an understanding of this, that's where you stop. You don't just get to say, now if I want to know more, I have to rely on testimony.
Okay.
You don't get to do that because you don't know more. There's no more epistemological warrant in that.
I don't know if there's no more epistemological warrant because what I feel is that that's more of a subjective thing than, it seems like that's an attitude that you're taking and not necessarily that everybody should be taking.
Well, I would argue it's an attitude that everybody should be taking because what you should be doing is proportioning your confidence level to the evidence. Mm-hmm. And if right now I have evidence that I'm having a conversation with you, in the future, all they will have is a recording, which could have been faked, could have been done in Hollywood. We could have staged all this. They could say, somebody could make all kinds of arguments about how we can't demonstrate that, you weren't a computer-generated voice because that technology might exist in the future. But would this conversation be sufficient on its own to conclude that there was a planet with humans and a TV show? Quite possibly, because none of those would be extraordinary claims. But when you're talking about something like cosmic microwave background radiation, which I would argue isn't necessarily the best evidence for, but a prediction made by the model, which was borne out by experiment and detection. And at some point in the future, people will not be able to conduct that experiment, and they'll be in a position where they either just trust that we did it right and that they have a good access to the data and the whole process, or they have to recognize there's not enough evidence for me now to be sufficiently confident. And then you have to stop there because when you don't have a method to become more confident, you don't get to go to a lesser method to increase your confidence.
Also,
that's the thing, right? Like, why do you say it's a lesser method? That is what I'm trying to understand. Because
somebody telling me something is lesser than me actually observing it and getting the data myself.
Why is that lesser?
I have $5,000 in my wallet. That's what I'm going to tell you. Do you believe me?
I don't know.
You don't know if you believe me? Bullshit. Do you believe me?
I don't know if you have $5,000.
Right. I'm not asking you that. I'm asking, do you believe my claim?
Well, I don't. Okay, so you're asking. That's a good point. I haven't thought about that. So let me just take a moment to think. So your question is, if you tell me that you have $5,000 in your wallet, should I believe you or not?
Are you convinced? I just told you. I have $5,000 in my wallet. Are you convinced?
Well, this is something I can actually come and verify, right?
No. Stop.
Yeah.
I am telling you right now.
Okay, so...
Am I going to... I have $5,000 in my wallet. Are you convinced that statement is true?
I am saying that it is something that can be verified. There is a hierarchy.
Oh my God! Would you just answer the question that I asked? Do you believe, based only on me telling you this is true, that it is true?
Well, I do not. Okay, no. And
thank you. Now, if I were to open my wallet and show you, would you believe then?
Yes.
That answers the question that you asked just a minute ago.
It doesn't. It doesn't.
Yes, it does. Let me finish.
You don't have to shout.
I don't have to talk to you either. Would you like me to?
No, I don't think.
Okay. Go ahead, V.
Okay, we're going to let you go then, but thank you for calling in. I think another thing, and this is where I was having a problem with this, was clearly the argument was then going to flow into, well, we have testimony about gods, but those are two different things.
Yeah.
Like, you can say, okay, I had my 8-year-old write down that the Big Bang happened,
Right.
and then we can weigh that against all, like, hundreds of thousands of pages of research about whether or not it happened. The scale isn't going to be evenly tilted, right? Like, saying that we can trust to a certain extent testimony about one thing is dependent on how good that verification process is, whether or not it's been disproven in the past. And yes, of course, there's going to be a point in time where we maybe can't access certain things because it's far beyond our reach. We're dealing with that now. We are restricted in how we view the universe, just based on the fact that we are highly evolved apes. But yeah, equating scientific research of hundreds and hundreds of years at this point in time when things go away.
Well, the question was about whether or not there's whether or not a claim, testimony, is a lesser standard of evidence than direct observation. And I find it curious that I asked the question, would you believe me if I said this, based only on the claim? And everything that he wanted to do was, well, that's something I can verify. That's this, that's this. In every interruption, he's acknowledging the point that the direct observation is superior standard of evidence to being told about something. This is intrinsically obvious to anybody. And when I try to come up with a bare bones example,
Yeah.
you know, I'm going to tell you this. Do you believe it based on that alone? Well, I could verify it. Isn't this something that's verified? You're answering your own damn question. And when the entire point of the argument was about how reliable testimony is, and by the way, we have good evidence that eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, and that the further removed you are from the event, the less reliable it becomes, because you're no longer remembering the event, you're remembering the last time you remembered the event or the last time you talked about the event, which is why we get fish tales about, I went fishing and I caught a fish that was this big. It's not just that that somebody's lying when they do that.
Oh, no. Yeah. A lot of the time they honestly believe it. And that's where the problem comes in.
We exaggerate, and we exaggerate to ourselves.
Yes, without a doubt. And I think the thing to take away from this is when there is nothing except for testimony, that doesn't mean that just because it's there, we have to now believe it because there's no other option. The other option is to reserve judgment and just say, I don't know and I can't know.
Yep. And lastly, the yelling. Sometimes there's a problem with the phones, especially when we're dealing with somebody calling on a cell phone, which isn't very good at full duplex or anything else. And so if I'm making a point and you're going to keep interrupting, then either I let you keep interrupting and the point doesn't get out, or I try to ramp it up a little bit. I'm not just yelling. It's not like I'm, it is not always the best method, and I try to do what I can, but I couldn't reach the mute button because I'm on the wrong side of the table and I'm not left-handed. There.
All right, let's take Sunny in Ohio.
Sunny.
Hey, Sunny, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good. What can we help you with today?
So, just calling today because I'm a non-believer and trying to kind of come out of the closet, per se, in a way that with coworkers that are always asking me to pray for them, or they ask me lead a prayer, or just the televangelical statements that people make. And it's to the point where it's so uncomfortable and they continue to ask that I'm not sure how to handle those anymore without being disrespectful.
They're asking you
or
to
getting
do
into
this
a debate.
at work?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
pretty much anywhere.
ugh.
And without telling us where you work, what kind of work is it? Because I don't know that I've ever worked anywhere where people ask me to pray or lead prayers.
I'm a federal employee. That might.
Oh.
What the fuck?
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
Whoa. All right.
That took a turn. Where's Andrew Seidel when you
right?
need
I was
him?
like, get Andrew on the phone. Yeah, you might actually have a potential lawsuit that you can file about that particular thing. Yeah, you should not be being asked to lead prayer at a federal job while you're on the job. That's
Shouldn't
not
be
okay.
asked to be lead unless you're in a church.
It's not in like
You
it's
shouldn't
not
be asked to lead a prayer.
like that. It's social circles within that environment.
Sure, I get it.
I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
It's not like a part of your job.
No.
It's
It's just,
they're just in. You're hanging out in the break room, and you're telling them your life stories, and somebody says, hey, I'm really having a difficult time. I'd like you to pray for me, or could you lead the prayer at lunch? I get that.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're not in a church-state
Now we're not-
separation
okay.
violation.
that was exciting for.
I was like, we're going to the
Like,
Supreme
right.
Court with this shit.
Yeah, that's rough though. That's really it's a tricky situation for sure. For me, if that was happening in the break room every day, I'd just avoid the break room. I'd go outside.
right.
I don't
So,
know. Yeah.
I mean, I work with hundreds of people every day.
Yeah.
And it's a conscious thing, and it's uncomfortable. And I'm to the point I just don't know what to even say or do.
Yeah.
And it's
I'm not sure how big of a deal this would be. Granted, I'm an out atheist, so this is unlikely to happen.
Right.
But quite often, when someone says, "I'd like you to pray for me," it's not so much just an assumption that you are a godly person like them, and that you reaching out to God might actually benefit them in some way. It is quite often psychologically more of a, I'm at the end of my rope, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Can you think nice things about me? Can you wish me well? Can you provide something that would provide comfort in this way? If somebody asked me to pray for them, I know that I would not tell them I would pray for them, but I would do what I could to comfort them and let them know that I care about their situation. And if there was some way I could help them in a practical sense, I would try and do that and let them know that I'm open to doing that. And if it's just, hey, I sympathize, I empathize, I think that sort of comfort gets you out of this. Just ignore the fact that they said prayer and pretend that they said, can you say something nice to me and, be nice and, maybe they want a hug or...
I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Not to interrupt, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
But it's to the point where, they're having a bad day. And I do that. I'm a very compassionate person. So I'm always like, what's wrong? Is there anything I can do? I would be more willing to help out and do things. But I've had a couple of women at work who would grab my hands crying and say, let's pray right now. And I'm like, I start visibly shaking. Like I just, it's almost an assault of my character. That's maybe taking it too far, but
I can feel like that for sure.
I mean,
this is what I do when I'm in a situation like that, and I've never been tearfully grabbed and asked to pray on the spot. That sounds like a very uncomfortable situation. But when I'm asked to maybe like when I'm in a family situation, because my whole family is still Christian, and they'll ask like, oh, does anyone want to pray for the food, or V, can you lead us in prayer? What I'll do is I'll be like, sure. Thank you, Mom and siblings, for making the food, and I'm excited we're all together, and have a great meal, everybody, and just leave the God part out of it.
Yeah, there's like 3 levels of that when you're asked to pray. One is that you fake it and you pray and lie, and the other one is that you do what V talked about, and then the third one, odd that it fell on that particular finger, is thank you, Satan, for this meal. If I haven't been in a position where somebody grabbed my hand and asked me to pray for them in a very, very long time, and at the time that it last happened, I was still a believer. I realize, you and I are going to feel different about this, and you look at it as a potential assault on your character and everything else. I view that in the exact same context. This is somebody who's desperate, and I will hold their hand. And in the same way that when people are praying in a church or praying for dinner, I will stand there quietly and respectfully. If my grandmother, who died just a few months ago, she knew I was an atheist, and if I had been at her house and she was crying and grabbed my hand and said, would you pray with me? I would hold her hand and I would let her pray, And I might even say amen because, depending on what was said in her prayer, because amen is not a religious word. It shows agreement. And if she's basically pouring her heart out and hoping, whether it's to a God, the universe, or fortune, for a better world, I can be supportive of that. And I don't think it would have bothered my grandma one bit that I was an atheist. And because this is about the human interaction. This is about being a person for another person. If they came up and said, and here's the thing, they didn't ask you what your religion was. If they're a Southern Baptist, they're not just assuming you're a Southern Baptist when they ask you to pray with them. You know, you could be Jewish, Baha'i, a Scientologist, any number of things. They don't care. They want a person to participate with them. And that is not the time for me to get in an argument explaining how prayer is bullshit.
Right.
That is a time for me just to be compassionate with a person. And then maybe when things improve for them or when we're in a different conversation, bring up, you remember the other day when you asked me to pray for you, I went ahead and did it, and participated along because I care about you. But in the interest of honesty, I just wanted you to know I probably don't share your religious views. As a matter of fact, I certainly don't share your religious views. And so that was kind of bothering to me because I don't want to be disrespectful. And if in fact it would be disrespectful for, let's say, a Scientologist or a Satanist or somebody else to pray along with you, I don't want to be in that position. I'm always happy to comfort you, but I need you to know who I am before you ask me for prayer again, and do it at a time that's more appropriate.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I'm definitely used to that. I mean, in another twist, I grew up in Utah as a non-Mormon. So that I'm used to dealing with that kind of situation of, and it's different here in Ohio because when they say you're from Utah, they just want to know how many other wives I have living at the house.
Yeah, that's how that goes.
Or how did I get out of the cult? I mean, so I appreciate that, and I like how you didn't twist it, but you changed the perspective of what I should take, and just continue the things I do. And I don't maybe need to say it out loud, but I mean, it does feel like it's constant.
Yeah,
I think
totally
get that. Maybe you just need to stop asking me.
Well, I think it's an opportunity because rather than running around going, I'm an atheist, or when they ask you to pray, say, oh, nope, I'm an atheist. Now they've seen that you can be compassionate and show caring for them. And then at a later point, when you have the conversation and you can say, you know what, I'm not religious. I don't believe in a God. I don't want to be disrespectful. I was trying to just comfort you. Now they're in a really weird position because if they've been taught that atheists are these evil, baby-killing, destroy the earth, sinful blah-blah-blahs.
And if you're Ohio, that's probably the case.
And that could be the case. Now they have to reconcile that with the fact that not only were you clearly a nice person, but you cared enough to not make this about you and your beliefs when they were going through something that was difficult.
Sounds great. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for calling. And
not a problem. Thank you. You guys have it.
Call back sometime. Let us know how it goes, if you've made any progress.
Thanks, honey.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. I remember when I first started distancing myself from religion, before I came out even to myself as an atheist, what I would do, because I would be on the phone with family or friends, and they'd always want to end the call with a prayer. And, it would have been before, let's pray together and let's all ask God for what we want. And for a while, I was just like, you do it. I'll listen. So it's also just, okay, I'm here, I will listen, I'll respect this. I'm not going to participate, but I will support you in what you are doing.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I've had that type of thing happen before. I have a weird take on it. As somebody who's been a magician since there was a kid, I often have conversations with other magicians and kind of beat them up because, not physically, but I think that there are magicians who think they are fooling people when they're not. When they're entertaining, and sometimes you're going to fool people, sometimes you're not. But also when you do it. Now, as a former Southern Baptist, when we would be praying and I would hear somebody say, I'm not, I don't want to do that, you do that. my first instinct as a Southern Baptist was, there's something wrong with their walk with God to where they're not comfortable talking to God right now, so I'll do that. And the more often it happens, the more I wonder, maybe they're having struggles with their faith. Maybe they don't even believe anymore. So pawning a prayer off on somebody isn't necessarily fooling them, but it is potentially a really good way for both parties to engage in that transition process.
Right, exactly. I found that helped a lot. Because I wasn't hiding anything at that point. It was just like, okay, I'm going to let you know where I stand without stepping on your toes.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
It's why when we talk about how and when to come out, the recommendations that I've given for years now is just be yourself, be honest, and when they ask the questions, you don't have to bring up the A word right away. You can just say, I don't believe that anymore, or anything along those lines. It doesn't have coming out doesn't have to be let me sit the whole family down. I have an important announcement to make. I don't believe that God's real anymore.
Right.
That type of thing.
Ducks.
Instead, be yourself and keep being the person that they like and know, and that'll make things a lot easier. And when they realize, what they're really saying is they're an atheist, by the time they get to that, they'll have already come to grips with you as who you are.
It's the whole don't throw a frog in boiling water.
Yes.
Heat it up slowly.
Or let's not kill frogs.
Or let's not kill frogs. That's also a good policy. So at this point, I'm just going to take the time to read our top 5 patrons on Patreon. Charlotte Crum, Desert Heathen, Bethany P., Dr. Funkenstein, and Rybaugh are all amazing people. And next week, you could be on this list too if you donate.
Yep, patreon.com/talkheathen to me.
Yes. Okay, talking about patrons and people who give a lot to the Talk Heathen community, I think we're going to go to Kamal in Alabama. Hey, Kamal, how are you doing? Nice to talk to you again.
Sister V, what's happening? How you doing?
I'm doing good. Hosting the show, no big deal. How are you?
I am absolutely honored to speak to the gentleman sitting next to you. It's because of him that I am an atheist. Matt, I've been watching your show, brother, from not the beginning. Well, I watched a lot of the videos you did, older videos that you did.
I'm sorry.
And you look flyer than you do back then, brother. But you look more handsome than you. I'm joking with you, bro.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Kamal. I'm glad if anything I've ever said has been helpful to somebody, that's enough.
Man, I feel kind of like a butthole because something y'all was talking about. I was at the bus station. I went to Detroit Beat. I went and saw my family, and it was kind of interesting, some of the interactions I had with my sister, definitely, and my 2 brothers. I mostly went and watched football games with them, see my nephew, watch Michigan coaches come down there and check my little nephew out. That was great.
Oh, that's awesome.
But my sister and I had a kind of a weird conversation. Honestly, I didn't really talk. I just let her tell me how she felt.
That's how it goes.
And I left it at that. And Matt, it's because of you that I am as outspoken as I am about who I am. And to be honest, if they don't like it, I got this from you. They can go to their hell. I really don't care. I'm going to be who I am, and I'm not going to let my family or anybody else take that away from me because I've given a lot. And the last thing I need to do is give up my dignity for somebody else, just to please somebody else. I'm not gonna do it, especially to my family. Mm-hmm. I was at the bus station yesterday, piggybacking off of what y'all was just talking about. There was a gentleman who came out and he was saying that his daughter he was at the bus station. I had a layover in Cincinnati. It was like 7 hours. I'm sitting there, minding my business. The guy came up and said, hey, if you got some change, can you give it to me? I haven't, my daughter haven't eaten. We've been sitting out here for a long while. God bless you, man. And he kept saying, God bless you, before I had even given him anything. Now I know the game. He was just using that to soften me up, to give him some, try to give him some money. And I'm like, bro, you don't have to keep saying, God bless me. I don't, if I wanted to give you some money, whether I believe you were telling the truth or not, is up to me, not your God. And he said, what do you mean you're God? Something to that effect. What do you mean? What, you don't believe in God? I was like, no, I don't. And I said, I'm an atheist. And he looked at me kind of weird, like he said, I've never met a black atheist before. Hell, before the atheist experience, I'd never met a black atheist before.
I'm pretty sure before the atheist experience, I'd never met a black atheist before either. And now I'm fortunate enough to be friends with some of them, including black non-believers folks in Mandisa and everybody else. And it's important.
Absolutely. And before you guys, I was a bit depressed, man, because my family wouldn't speak to me, and I didn't know who to talk to. But Matt, I'm gonna ask you this, brother.
Okay.
Now that I've went to Detroit and I've spoken to my people and I see where they land, how they are, and it's not positive, to be honest with you, especially my sister.
Sure.
I don't know if we'll speak or not, but what should I do, brother? Should I just move on and just, I don't want to not speak to my family. I don't want it to be that way. Especially in my situation, I believe that family, and I have a son who means more to me than anything. But I love my brothers and sisters also, and I want to stay in contact with my nieces and nephews. But I don't know how my sister's going to react to that, because she made it clear that she did not want me to talk to my nieces and nephews about God. No problem. I respect that. I wouldn't have done it anyway.
Yeah.
Did you tell her that?
But absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think you're doing the right thing. I'm not in charge of who's in a relationship with me, or who's willing to have a relationship with me, whether they're blood relatives or friends or whatever, if they don't want to be. And so making it clear that I don't want to end this relationship with you, and I don't think our position on whether or not there's a God is the sum total of what our relationship should be about or anything else. I've had plenty of people end relationships with me merely because I'm an atheist. And it hurts, but that's their problem, not mine. Because it's not like I did something to them. It's they won't have a relationship with me because of what I believe and who I am. Now, I'm fine. There are people who I have ended relationships with because of what they believe and who they are. Because I've known some people who were legitimately terrible and believed terrible things. Racist crap, misogynistic crap, people who are supporting death to the gays bills and things like that. I don't want them in my life. I don't care if we're kin or not. But I don't tend to end relationships with people just because we have a disagreement on even an important issue, if I see that there's any hope that we can still have a relationship in another way. My mom and dad, when I read out the birthday card, if that had ended our relationship, I had to be fine with it, but I didn't want that. I'm happy to continue talking to both of them for the rest of our lives and interacting with them on other subjects. So as far as I can tell, based on what you've said, I think you're doing the right thing. And one thing to keep in mind is you might need to give it some time.
Yeah.
Because your sister's, she could come around to be like, oh, well, all right, we're not going to agree, and maybe I don't want you talking to my kids about God, but I don't want to cut you out of my life. You're my brother, and I love you, and I'll pray for you type of thing. She might come to that sort of thing where God is going to do a powerful work in Kamal's life at some point, and as long as she's got that rationalization to hang on to, you guys can talk about baseball and football and what the kids are doing and in school and all that type of stuff that families talk about. Because I tell you this, I grew up as a Southern Baptist in church all the time. The God talk increased when they found out I was an atheist.
Yeah.
It didn't decrease. I can remember tons of time sitting around with my folks where there was no discussion about God unless it was like, hey, this Sunday at church, we're going to do this or whatever. But it wasn't part of casual conversation until they found out I'm an atheist. Yeah. And it's because they feel a duty to kind of ramp it up. Let's get Matt and Kamal saved. Let's bring them back to the Lord. And I just cut them slack on that for a decade. I treat my family different than a caller. On the occasions where I have treated my family as if they were just a caller calling in, surprisingly, it actually turned out better than cutting them slack.
The bus station. I'm sorry, brother.
No, that's fine.
The guy at the bus station, after we talked for a little while, and he was saying that he couldn't believe that he was actually. I mean, he was amazed. Like, it blew my mind. But the thing, I didn't know what to do when he asked me to pray with me after I gave him $5. He said he kept saying, thanks, God is going to bless you, guys. And I'm like, bro, I wasn't getting offended, none of that. But it's like he didn't hear anything I said. And I tried to explain to him what an atheist was, because you're right. It was all devil shit. He thought it had something to do with the devil. I'm like, bro, do some research.
Yeah, it's a defense. It's a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
They don't know. They don't know and understand.
He was getting angry because when I was saying I said, well, prove to me that there's a God. He said he went with personal testimony. I said, that's not enough for me, bro. That's just not enough. He said, well, who wakes you up in the morning? He said, well, how did you get here? I said, my mom and my dad, and so on. Well, who got them here? Come on, bro. Really? I'm like, you don't want to know. We'll never. I gave you the $5, not because any God told me to, but because you said your daughter was hungry.
Yeah, you don't believe in God, but you do believe in good.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what I was trying to explain to him. I don't care about what your God says. I care about your daughter who's hungry in there. And you just happen to, because I would hope that you would do the same for me, not because your God told you to, but because I'm another human being who's in need of help. And there it is. And I left it at that.
And I'm glad you did it that way.
Yeah.
So Austin has a massive homeless population. There are people out seeking donations on tons of street corners. There's a homeless shelter. We work with groups, Atheists Helping Homeless, Humanists at Work, and others. There was a period of time, probably in the first few years of me doing this show, where if I would pull up to a street corner and someone was holding up a sign asking for something, if it had a cross or a God bless or whatever, I wouldn't give them anything. And if it didn't have any religious language on them, on the sign, I would give it to them. And then at some point, I realized what a prick I was being, because first of all, somebody's either in need or they're not, and their religious views are separate from it. And a good chunk of them probably are using the God language to guilt believers into doing the thing that they're supposed to do according to their religion in the first place.
Or they just bought into the theory that Christians are better people.
Yeah, sell all your belongings and give the money to the poor. Yeah. Hey, let me include this God bless thing, or it's a way of connecting with the majority of people. Hey, I'm one of you. When I realized what a prick I was being for that, I started giving money pretty much any time I came across somebody, to the point where on a couple of occasions I was broke and they were not. And then I came up with a better way, which is instead of giving to individuals who are standing on street corners handing out stuff where I don't know what's going on, I give to homeless shelters and organizations that are doing something to help them, because I have I'm more convinced that money is going to go to help more people, et cetera. A friend of mine once said, yeah, don't give money to the panhandlers on the corner, because they might just use it for drugs. And at first, for a little bit, I think I kind of bought into that. And then I had an epiphany one day that was, so what?
Right.
If they're fucking living under the bridge and they take my $20 and go get high and it brings them some peace, I think that's a good thing. Now, it's not the best thing. I would prefer that they be sober and clean. I prefer that they not be living on the street.
Right.
But if you're just like, oh, don't give it to them because they're just going to use it for booze, let them. If I'm out homeless underneath the bridge and the way that I'm coping is to, take a few dollars and get a drink, How's that different from me buying a drink for somebody at the bar who's at the bar trying to get over their crappy marriage or whatever else? It's the same thing.
Right. Your
Do good to help
responsibility ends with the decision to do good in that moment.
Yeah.
What they do with it afterwards is not dependent on you. You've made the right choice.
Plus, they might have taken that $20 and bought food for 10 people.
If I always felt like, and believe me, there's a lot of homeless cats in Detroit. I've always said to myself, well, who knows? If I can just get him through that one day, maybe if I can keep him alive to that next day, who knows? Maybe he might go tomorrow and find help. Who knows? Mm-hmm. And that's just the way I looked at it. And I looked at it just like you, Matt. And I said, what the hell? You know, why not help him out? If that's all he has, and I'm helping him, I'm keeping him alive. And if it's cold as hell and he's outside, like, what the hell, man? It's him. He can do what he want to do. It's not up to me to judge.
Yeah, right. And that was V's point, which is right on the money. Your responsibility ends with doing the act of good.
Right. Kamal, I love that you are representing the atheist community so well and being outspoken about what you believe, but also backing that up with good actions and actions that help other people.
Yeah, you're kind of a badass. You should come down to Austin sometime.
Yeah, for sure.
Hoorah. You know, Matt, I was just talking to Sister Monster. Oh, God, like you know who Sister Monster is. She's in the Discord, and, man, that's the best, that place. If I'd have had that place, I was talking to the guys a couple of days ago when I was in Detroit. If I'd have had the Atheist Discord about, say, 10 years ago, man, it would have helped me. Oh, boy. Mm-hmm. I'm learning so much, and I'm learning about, transgender issues, and we talk so much about all kinds of stuff, and I'm learning. Sometimes I'll just sit there and shut the hell up and just listen. My grandma always told me, you learn the most when you shut the hell up. And she was right. And I again, Matt, brother, I'm honored to speak to you, man. It really made my day. I just got home today from Detroit at 7:30 this morning. I was supposed to be here yesterday at 12, but hey, to get here and be able to talk to you, brother, that made it all worth it. What the hell?
Well, and, you just made my day, and I'm very grateful.
Awesome. Thank you so much for calling in, Kamal, and definitely call again.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll talk to you later, man.
Peace.
Bye. Kamal always makes my day when he calls.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, we've got 2 more callers in about 15-20 minutes, so we're going to cycle through those super quick. Let's go to Michael in Florida. Hi, Michael. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. We've got about 10 minutes. Go.
All right. I think this will be a quick one. So basically, I'm confused about how atheists believe that certain gods do not exist, but then there are other gods that you just don't believe exist. How can you claim both? I am an atheist, by the way. I'm just confused.
Oh, okay. So this is how I approach that. When you say in general that a god, some supernatural force exists, I am agnostic about that. I do not think that we can know that one way or the other. To me, until that is demonstrated and my belief is falsified, I don't know. And so I will say, I don't know if there's a God. I have no belief in one because I don't know. Now, when we get more specific and we talk about individual gods who defy laws of logic or who allegedly have done things that we can't back up or that contradict what we see in history, then I can say that God specifically doesn't exist because it defies history, science, logic, all of those things. So that's kind of the breakdown. Big overview, God as some kind of force out there. Who knows? I don't believe, but that's me. Individual gods that spring from that, whether it's an Abrahamic god or some other god, those particular ones, I can pretty confidently say I just don't believe that those ones exist.
Or actively believe that. If there's a God, if the definition of a God is such that it is in conflict with other facts, like if you say, the God I believe in makes sure that the sky on earth is pink all of the time, well, that God clearly does not exist. Now the God that you're pointing to might exist and your definition is wrong, but just going with the definition, I will actively believe that God does not exist because it is contraindicated by the evidence. For a God that is kind of ill-defined and nebulous, yeah, I just don't believe it exists. I will as soon as there's evidence for it.
Right.
All right, that makes sense. But isn't there a point, like at what point can the lack of evidence be submitted as evidence to the contrary?
Oh, that's great.
Because
there's that Sagan quote that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Right.
Sagan was wrong. He wasn't wrong in what he meant. It's just the way that sentence has been used is wrong. Because the absence of evidence where we would expect there to be evidence were the claim to be true is in fact evidence for absence. It's just like saying, I killed 3 people and stuffed them in my trunk last night, and we go out and look at your trunk, there's no bodies, no blood, nothing. That absence of evidence for your claim is evidence against the claim. It's not confirmation that you didn't slaughter 3 people, but it's evidence against it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, it's just a deistic God that we just don't know, and the rest, the other specific gods, just don't think exist.
Well, yeah, kind of. If you look at the definition of theism, there's the broad general, there is a God, but then there's there's a second definition that a lot of theists use, which is an active participatory God in the world, one that has a personal relationship, yada yada. So that particular form of theism is I'm an atheist about. Theism, it doesn't affect me. If God wound up the universe and then threw it out and isn't dealing anything with it, then...
Yeah, that deism is a useless God.
Right. It's like,
and
okay, so what?
Yeah. The situation of it is true there is a deistic God and it is not true there is a deistic God are functionally identical from our perspective.
Right.
If you talk about specific gods, now take the God of the Bible. You could either not be convinced that that God is real, or you could be convinced that that God isn't real. And I can go either way depending on how somebody wants to define the God of the Bible. Because one of the things that there's a reason this has survived so long is this apologetics process of saying, we're going to define God in this way. And when you point out a flaw with it, if there is an inherently plausible rationalization, like when you say, well, God answers prayer. And then somebody says, well, really? How often does God answer prayer? We don't know. Well, if you say you don't know how often God answers, I actually had at a Church of Christ in San Antonio, I had an argument with a guy who said that we can never know whether or not God answered a specific prayer, but we can know that God answers prayer. And I pointed out that this is mathematically, logically impossible. That if it is true for each individual prayer, then it is true for the set, and you can't just make an exception. But if you said, God answers prayers, and sometimes he says no, and that God answers prayer at roughly the rate of chance, well, now you've defined a God that is untestable, that is unidentifiable. And so instead of believing that God doesn't exist, I'm just in a position where I'm not only not convinced, I could not be convinced. You've defined your God in such a way that there's no way to get to being convinced.
Right, and if you define a God as what is already happening, and I don't believe in that God, then there's no reason for me to, if I know that the things are going to keep happening either way.
Yeah. So it's a little complicated,
right.
And that's why you need to get people to say exactly what they believe,
right?
Why they believe it, and perhaps more importantly, why they think anybody else should believe it.
Right. So for the God of the Bible is it's only depending on how they define it.
Yeah.
When
you say God of the Bible, you have to recognize that the Bible includes both Judaism in its various forms and thousands of denominations of Christianity that disagree on every single point of doctrine.
Also, there are many gods in the Bible as well. There's not just the one.
Yeah. Well, the one that it's supposedly about, who also says things like man has become like us and wants to punish people, or the Egyptian temple priests that use their God
yeah.
to summon snakes. It wasn't so much that their God wasn't real, it's that the Jews' God was more powerful. And so Moses throws down his staff and it eats the other snakes. And that's meant to show that, oh, your gods are real, but my God's a fucking badass.
My God's got
and he will tear your gods up.
Yep.
And so it's not just enough to say the God of the Bible, even if they're talking about Yahweh.
Who is different than El.
Potentially. It's like one of those things where is El, Elohim, Yahweh, Allah, are those different gods or those different names for the same God? Depends on who you talk to. And the same is true for devil, Satan, Mephistopheles, Beelzebub, etc. Are those all names for the same Lucifer? And what's the story with that? Is it as depicted with Lucifer, where this is God's agent that is out here working for God, or is this God's enemy and man's enemy? And it depends on what verses you look at and which stories you go with and where you're going to prioritize things.
Yeah.
So you got to have people say what they believe.
Yeah, get them talking first and then go off of what they believe.
Right. That makes total sense.
Awesome.
All right. Well, that's it.
Thank you so
guys
much for calling
very
in,
much
Michael.
for taking my call.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.
So just a...
Oh, no. I knew I was going to mess up at some point.
That's all right. We were short on time anyway.
Okay. I am so
V
sorry.
did everything perfectly today.
Up until the very last
right then when
minute.
she hung up on the last caller at the it's all right.
Call back next week.
You know how many
We'll talk
times
to you.
I've accidentally I've done it on purpose, but you know how many times I've accidentally hung up on people? A lot.
Oh my gosh.
This was fun.
This was so much fun.
I love the points you made. I loved sitting in on Talk Heathen today, even if I did get a little loud with one guy. But,
you don't need to yell, Matt.
That's me. I'm afraid. Maybe I can't quite go like full teller where I just not talk because then there's no maybe I'll whisper.
You would freak so many people out if you just...
Today on the Atheist Experience, I'm going to try whispering. We'll be back at, or I'll be back at 4:30 p.m. Central to do Atheist Experience with a whisper.
And until then, if you don't believe... You are going to annoy the shit out of Vern. Guys, if you don't believe, then we're here for you. We are your community. We are the people that will welcome you with open arms. We're your community. And now, if you do believe, we don't hate you. We just think you're wrong. Told you I was going to make you say it.
There weren't love rings.
There weren't love rings. I forgot that part.
I won't say it on principle, but
I know you hate it.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?
No, you're done.